Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the BPT Bravery Show. Today's guest is Bryan, a mental health advocate, and we will be discussing how to deal with abusive family members and toxic environment. Check out his social media channels on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. So now sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Hi, and welcome to the BPD Bravery Show, where we discuss tips, strategies, struggles, triumphs, and success stories related to borderline personality disorder. Here is your host, Faye Green.
I'm so happy to talk to you because I love your TikTok videos. Not
Thank
only because it's informative, but also because it's entertaining. Whenever I watch it, there's something to laugh about. The way you do it, the way you say it. It's just like, yeah, I can relate, but also it's funny. So I'm excited. I'm so excited that
Thank
we
you.
were able to do this. Should we start with the move?
This is my second flat on my own. The first time I moved out was 2021 after, kind of 27 years of living at home and just being in that kind of toxic environment. But without kind of too much information, like I moved out, I was like, I feel like I'm getting a hang of this. And then something traumatic happened with my neighbor that kind of pushed things back a bit, like for me, that kind of dampened the experience a bit. And it was quite funny because I think like before actually moving out, I was having a conversation with a friend and she was like, just take this time, focus on yourself, don't worry about anyone else. And then I think 2 months later I met my partner. So yeah. And then I found it quite hard being at that flat because the stuff happened with that neighbor. So then new neighbors moved in. They were extremely loud all the time. And then I was living opposite like a construction site, so there was noise all the time there. And I was just like, I could like, and again, it was just how pokey the flat is as well. It was just so, it was awful. The positives, though, I think I did do a lot of kind of growing in that time. And then that's when I started to kind of cut family out and talk about my experiences with the family abuse a bit more because obviously it felt safer. And then stuff happened in 2021 where I was getting kind of horrible messages, and that was kind of the last nail in the coffin to be like, I need to move away from this town because I've been here for 27 years. I was severely bullied and abused by people, and my family is huge. My mum's one of 13. So
Whoa.
yeah,
Okay.
so it's a small town with a massive family. I will walk down like the high street and like probably see at least like 2 people I'm related to, or even like the coffee shop that was near my flat. Like I'd walk past and I'd see somebody that used to bully me at school, and it was just couldn't escape it. But this move, such a long process. It was like a house swap because it had to be kind of approved by like the housing associations. That's why it took longer because we viewed each other's flats in like the June or July, and we were both like, yeah, we want to swap. So there was like, yeah, we'll get the paperwork out. Didn't get the paperwork till like December. And then they kept being like, oh, we're gonna have to move it to this date or this date. And then that's what was annoying as well, because I had to put a lot on hold. I couldn't commit to things because I was like, well, I'll probably be moving in a few weeks or a month. So I didn't really want to commit to much. Because even like I did a performance of Jekyll and Hyde in November last year. And I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be moving, so I'll audition and see what happens. Then I got the part, and I was like, I'll just keep seeing what happens. And then, yeah, the move, glad it's here now, so I can kind of focus on stuff. So,
How did you decide to move to this? You wanted out, right? But what made you
Mhm.
choose the city that you're in right now?
It was somewhere I was still relatively familiar with, but it was kind of enough out the way that I could get away from stuff, I think, without it being too unfamiliar.
And your boyfriend was totally cool with the move.
Yeah, I mean, because like we never lived together anyway. Like it's a long distance thing, so
Oh,
um,
okay.
by about I think like 2 or 3 hours. So like he was supportive through the whole kind of process. I mean, even like he was like kind of getting annoyed for me, like, oh, when are you gonna like? I'm annoyed that you're not hearing anything. And I think also because obviously he was gonna help me move. He
Oh,
also had to like kind of plan work and stuff. So it's like,
The
well,
schedule
let
as
me know when
well.
you move so I can book it off. And I'm like, I have no idea.
But that is so sweet. And so I have a question. Something that I struggle with a lot is when you go to a new city, how do you make new friends? Or have you made
uh,
friends yet?
well, it's funny. So I think because of the move, like I've been kind of not great mentally at the moment, like just a lot of change and also a lot of kind of questioning things of my own life as well. It's like, well, what do I want out of life now? I do have this freedom to go and be myself or whatever. But so I do my usual BPD thing and just like rant into the void on Twitter, being like, I hate my life, and then I love my life and I hate my life. And then someone messaged me actually that was like, oh, I saw actually no, I think it was the video I did about loneliness actually. I think it was that. And
I
they
like that
messaged
one a
me.
lot because I could very much relate to it.
Yeah, and I think, with the kind of lack of emotional permanence that's with BPD, it's very quick to feel lonely. I got a message on Instagram being like, "Oh, I saw your video about loneliness. I've got BPD too." And then it turns out they lived in this town as well. So we decided to kind of like meet up and go for a drink. So that was nice. But it's also scary how small the world can be, though. That loneliness was definitely, I think I was worried about that moving here. But then I kind of rationalized it and was like, well, even in my hometown, it was still the same situation where I'd only see like my closest friend like every few months, and other people would be like planning in advance. So it wasn't really much different. I kind of like, because I think what gave me a good taste as well was going up to my partners and kind of walking around and not having this fear that I'm going to bump into someone I know or somebody's going to come up to me or I'm going to see somebody. Like, although I have seen a few people from my hometown here because it's not that far. One day I saw somebody that like lived doors down from me at like my old town. Then I saw like a friend of like an ex when I was 16, and it's just like I can't escape. But at least I haven't seen any family. That's the good thing so far.
And you got a nice bigger apartment, so there's that.
Exactly. Because I remember, because again with the house swap, like the guy that I swapped with, he was like, "Oh, the people downstairs, they were worried that you were moving in because you're young, you might be making noise." I'm like, I literally just play video games on my own. Like I do not party. Like I'm in bed by 10 o'clock,
Yeah,
like
but for
ready to
me,
go.
I screwed up big time when I moved down here.
Mm,
So I lived in New York and I packed up everything. I moved to North Carolina, which is about 9.5 hour drive. If you make like three short stops. I knew no one.
mm,
And at that point I wanted to get away from everyone and everything. And it was after several like tough relationships. And I'm like thinking to myself, that's it, I've had it. I'm gonna isolate from everyone.
mhm,
And at first it was okay because I'm like, I'm isolating from everyone because I don't want to get hurt anymore. I can't take the pain. The pain is way too much. But
mhm,
you know what? By now, it's been 3.5 years. The isolation is literally killing me. It's
mhm,
it's so unhealthy what I did. I kind of built a wall around myself, and I didn't make many friends here, which was a big mistake. So yeah, I am gonna move again in we're now in March.
February,
So
just.
I'm moving again in 4 months,
Mhm,
and I have to do something different. I can't do this isolation and this loneliness because it's literally like destroying me. So that's why I was asking how do you deal with a new place, not going into this cycle of isolation and loneliness, but you've already
yeah.
met up with people, which is nice.
And I think also though, I think my tolerance is different literally depending on the day or the hour. Like I could, and also like I don't know about you, but especially with BPD, like it's very conflicting. Like I'll have a day where I'm like, I don't want to be around anyone, but then I'm like, why is nobody seeing me? Nobody's talking to
Right?
me. I've shut myself off. Um,
It's like,
but
why am I
there's
not getting any messages? Oh, you haven't, you've gone silent for quite some time.
because have you thought about like kind of whether you'd want to like join in communities or anything for when you move?
Very much so. Yeah, I do, but I don't know where, how. Like I very much want it right now.
Mm,
Because in the summer I was in Europe. It was in Greece for 2 months, and I lived in a small town, and it felt like a community, and I felt like a part of something, and it
mhm,
felt so good. And when I came back here, I said, I won this here, but I don't know how to find it. So
And it's like multiple steps as well. Like you could get there, and then you're like, I'm too scared to walk in,
oh
or that internal monologue, like everybody's staring at me, they hate me, they're judging me, all this negative stuff, and then before you know it, you're walking back home. It's weird because it happened the other day. Like I was walking around in town, and there was this kind of. I think I didn't realize it was like because it was half term here, so it was for kind of like college kids and stuff. I didn't realize that, but they had this kind of like safe haven thing. And even seeing that, I was like, I don't feel safe walking into a safe haven sort of mindset. Like, oh, I'd still, because obviously, like, I was like, then, like, oh, it's for kind of college kids. Obviously, I didn't go in anyway, but I was like, I wouldn't even feel safe going in there if I was that age. I think, my kind of educational years were not great. And, with bullying and abuse and stuff, like, when that happens, when you're a kid or a teenager, that's obviously when your brain starts to develop. So that's when you start to develop that sense of self, or obviously in our case, kind of a lack of one, or your sense of self is what other people think of you or other people's perceptions. And that's because it's annoying because people like just don't think about it. I will sit there playing a game, watching TV, and I'll try so hard not to think about the stuff I've been through, but it's literally just there, just like on a loop. And I'll get annoyed with myself that it won't go away. And then people are like, oh, well, just don't think about it. And it's just like, it's not that easy.
yeah, you can't just turn your brain off. Just
No,
don't.
but
Just don't.
I think I noticed kind of since making some new connections, I think because I'd been with my partner so long, I kind of became so a bit more comfortable, and
Mhm.
I wasn't showing many symptoms, but I noticed then meeting new people, I started again being like, oh, do they like me? Oh, they said this. That was a bit funny what they said. Or they looked at each other when they said this thing. Or, you know, yeah, they were being nice, but they're probably just being polite. They probably actually hate my guts. And like, having
I
had that,
thought only I think of that.
thing is with BPD, like, we'll be kind of pretty much in crisis 1 minute and then we're fine the next. Or sometimes you kind of constantly do stuff when you're not doing well. So, like, on TikTok, I think I wasn't doing well, so I kept posting videos, even though I was like, oh, I think I'm going to come off here. It's too much. But then I just kept posting.
Mhm.
And again, this guy that was following me was like, oh, well, you're just doing it for attention. You're a fame hungry whore. And then he messaged me, being like, oh, sorry, I was just having a really bad day. I'm like, great, cool. Nice to know I was your punching bag for that.
Yeah. Do you
But
think that is because it's online and not to your face in person, people are more likely to say such things? Because they're hiding
mm,
behind their laptop or their phone?
absolutely, I think, I think sometimes it could be like a jealousy thing. Like, they're like, oh, well, I want that. So I'm not getting that kind of thing. I used to talk about mental health online before it was like popular. Um, and my friends would always like take the piss out of it, or they would not once share a video or something I've done, but they were quick to jump on and be like, oh, well done, you've won an award. Oh, I'm so proud of you. Oh, I always believed in you. I was like, you've not once supported it until it got somewhere slightly. And that especially happened with my family because, bearing in mind, my mum's one of 13. I got on with maybe one member of the family, and they would like not acknowledge me in the street. They would not talk to me. And then start doing stuff on TikTok. I'd get comments being like, oh, hi, cousin, how are you? Oh, you're amazing. Oh, you're so good at this. But again, a week later, they won't talk to me in the street.
That
And,
is so weird. Because I've
and
had family members not talk to me. I know why they did.
well,
I chose a different path than them. I wasn't as religious as them, so they decided, I wasn't good enough for them to
mhm,
say hi. But I knew, but they wouldn't then come to me and say nice things. They just, they thought of me, and they still do. They still, if they'd see me, they just walk past by me, most of them.
mm,
But it's not like two-faced. They're terrible. They're like showing me to my face, I don't like you. I don't want to talk to you, and that's it. I have even my siblings. I've got siblings who don't talk to me, but they wouldn't then come and say nice things to me, or we
mhm.
don't like you. We don't want to talk to you. You're out of our lives, and that's it.
That's the thing, like, I'd imagine, because obviously that's still tough, but I'd imagine it was still easier to kind of separate then, because you're like, well, they're being awful 24/7.
Right.
Like, whereas again, like recognizing my family was all about these appearances. So a week before I moved out into my first flat, I had a relative say to me, "Oh, you won't move out. You can barely look after yourself." And then I got the flat, bumped into them when they was with a friend, and they were like, "Oh, congratulations on the flat. Like, if you need any help." But they were still put in like a snide comment, because then they were like, "Oh, by the way, pasta bake doesn't count as cooking." And I'm like, as far as I'm aware, I put it in the oven. That's cooking, sure. Yeah, they would always like find a way to kind of put me down. That's how they do it. These kind of dynamics. They'll say something nice, but they'll still slip something in there to kind of catch you a bit.
Why do you think they do that? That people do that? Is it
Um,
that they're trying to be nice, but they just can't? It's not possible for them. Like,
I think for them, because like two people that come in mind, like one of them is a relative. Obviously, I came along, and then obviously they probably didn't get as much attention anymore.
mm,
Um, but I was that kind of annoying kind of younger sibling being like, "Oh my God, I want to hang out with you," blah blah. But it was weird though. Like they didn't like when I got attention, but they would also try and infiltrate my friendships and like try and become friends with them themselves. And then I had an ex-friend. Again, I think it was a thing where they liked the attention on them. I don't like the term attention seeking, but I think it's just they didn't like it when it was on someone else. And how we became friends was a typical kind of mean girls thing. Like we were on a school trip, and like because I was alone, I was like eating lunch by myself. And it was literally like the whole, "Oh, come sit with us, have lunch with us," sort of thing. Yeah, just all these snide comments started coming out about like my sexuality, them being like, "Oh, well, the reason why people treat you like crap is because you're weird, you're ugly. Oh yeah, that guy's probably checking me out. He wouldn't be checking you out. You're ugly." And then one time we went to gay pride, and obviously I got some attention that they were used to getting. So I went to the toilet, I came back, and they were like, "Oh, they're saying nasty things about you. We should go home," just because they weren't getting the same attention. Yeah, I think it's a possible insecurity thing, possible control thing, because as well, like they didn't like when I had other friends. Funnily enough, in this town, they were like, "Oh, I don't like those friends. They're trying to take you away from my hometown." Then a year later, they moved like across the world.
but that's good for you. No.
Yeah, it's a tough one because again, they weren't horrible all the time,
Mhm.
just like 80% of the time. But
That's a lot
like
too. That's a lot too, though. But I have a question for you. How do you deal, say, with people making those comments to you, to your face, or people making those comments to you? What is your response? How do you just not let it get to you? Getting those mean comments on social media. How do you deal with it?
I don't, to be honest, I will like
So
literally
you
be like, right, you know what? I'm gonna deactivate all my social media. I'm a trash human being. I'm gonna go and cry in bed. And yeah, that's definitely something I'm still working on. I think it depends what they're saying though, because again, like you'll get it from like anonymous accounts, right? Bot accounts. And I'm like, that doesn't phase me. Like I'm like, sure. Because I had an extended family member who was homophobic anyway, but for some reason they decided to have a vendetta against me because I've been calling out my family about stuff and being like commenting, being like, "Oh, if only people knew the real Brian who hid behind his sexuality and his followers." I'm like, what are you talking about? After like again, like a horrible message I got at Christmas, I blocked my entire family on everything. Within an hour, my mum's like, "Oh, your sister's wondering why you blocked her on Facebook." I was like, "Well, clearly you were looking then, if it was that quick." But yeah, about a month later, I got an anonymous message on Instagram being like, "Why have you blocked your family on everything?" And because again, like I spoke to my therapist about it today, and he was like, "Well, they can't have it both ways, like they make it very clear that they don't like me, but they want to have access to my life and what I'm doing." One relative of mine, like, they were very kind of on it with my social media. I had, like a few years ago on Twitter, I had like a private account, and somehow they found out about that. And I was like, how do you know about that? They said, oh, I have my ways. Yeah, so I think like most comments, I think it depends on the day. Again, like if I'm relatively fine, it'll probably get to me a bit. Then I'm like, you know what, I'm just gonna ignore it. But sometimes, yeah, nope, I'm done. I'm gonna go and cry in bed. Because it's very tricky because I think for me is that again that lack of sense of self, because I will think something about myself. I'll be like, oh, I'd like to think I'm a nice person, or I'm this kind of person, or whatever. Then somebody will leave a comment, and I'm like, maybe they're right. Maybe that is what's going on. It's very quick for me to question my own reality, just because I think, of all the gaslighting I've had, where it's always like, oh, you're the one that's wrong. You're the one that's perceiving things wrong. You've got an attitude, or they didn't mean it that way. So it's very quick to just be like, oh, well, yeah, I'm probably wrong. They're probably right. Even if it's somebody that I literally do not know, I'm like, oh yeah, they're probably right about me. So
I had for me with my family, it
uh,
was hell until I had to cut ties. I literally had to cut ties. In fact, I didn't talk to my parents for 5 years, and I didn't see them for 8 because it was hell. And that's another reason why I wanted to leave New York, was I wanted to leave it all behind. Even if I lived at that point, I lived like almost 2 hours away.
mhm,
If some of my relatives, like an uncle, would find out where I work, they would actually call my manager to drive it. They even asked my manager if they could meet me. They were going to drive 2 hours to just come and see me and yell at me for my life choices. It was too much. And so that's when I decided I had to get away from that situation. I changed my phone number.
mhm, yeah,
I mean, like with my uncles, cousins, I don't talk to almost anyone. It's
mhm,
they're in the past. It's over. It's cut ties. It's all it's I couldn't. It was so unhealthy. And then I came down here, and one of the things was that I did have friends in New York, which I left behind. And I thought, with the internet, of course, nothing's gonna change.
mhm,
With some friendships didn't change, but some did. And so then I come down here and I'm so hurt and I want to just isolate,
uh-huh,
and I'm afraid to have more friendships because I don't want to feel the pain anymore. It's too
mhm,
painful. And then 3 years later, I find myself all alone, literally. And it's like, oh, why did I do this? Why did I isolate myself so much? I should have made more of an effort to meet people here. But I've experienced a traumatic event here, and I'm moving.
okay.
I'm not staying here, but it's also like you said, finding community.
I think that's one of the most painful things about it, that like you want to connect so badly with people, but it's just that there's something there just not letting you. And even if I am talking to someone, or I've met up with someone, or hanging out with friends, whatever, it still feels very disconnected. Like it feels like it's the world and then me. Like there's something there, and I can't quite connect. So I think as well, again, speaking to my therapist about, when I was 13, 14, I joined a lot of kind of gay chat rooms and stuff like online, just because my actual reality was just so crap, that then, because I spent a lot of time, like I was literally in my room every day on my computer talking to God knows how many men, usually older men. And that's where I think I struggle with reality sometimes, because I'm having people gaslighting me, being like, oh, that's not what happened, but then I'm shutting myself off from the real world and just connecting to people online, where, because since being away from my family, I feel like I am more confident, I can interact with people more, and I feel like the real me is sort of coming out. But of course, those people are like, oh, well, you were easily reactive, you were so sensitive. I'm like, because I was constantly putting up with your stuff without a break. I was being bullied at school, I was being abused at home, I had shitty friends. I did not have a space to breathe. But I think a question I wanted to ask you, because you said, kind of cutting your family off, like, How long did it take for you to kind of be, like, okay with that? Like, when did the guilt stop, if it did?
Oh, the guilt. That was a big one. Especially not talking to my parents was the guilt was the worst. Well, with the rest of my family, with I mean uncles and that, I never felt much guilt because they were not nice to me. They
Yeah.
even till today, they're trying to figure out my phone number, and they're not going to call and say nice things. They're going to call to harass me. So I've never
Mhm.
felt guilt with that. You've never respected me ever, so I didn't feel that. But with my parents, the guilt was so strong, especially my mom, because I knew it was eating away at her. I don't know. I can't say that I was ever like zero guilt. I think it was over the 5 years it got less and less, and it
Mm.
wasn't like I didn't miss them, but I could the last few times before I stopped talking to her, now I talk to her again, but because basically she got the message across that if she acts that way, I can't talk to her. She would just cry and yell at me for my life choices and why I am the way I am.
Mhm.
And that was every time. It was the guilt of not talking to her, but if I spoke to her, I would live with the guilt of making her cry every time I
Yeah.
talk to her. And
Mhm.
so my question was, should I not talk to her and at least, maybe she was crying, but like not maybe not as hysterical. Um
Uh-huh.
uh, Either way there was a lot of guilt whether I talk to her or whether I don't. And even now, I mean, I
Mhm.
talk to her and we have a relationship, but can I say that I feel great after I talk to her? No, I can't say
No.
that, but I'm enough removed from the situation. And after 5 years of not talking, she got the message that if she pulls what she used to pull on me,
Mhm.
I'm gonna stop talking to her, right? I'm not
Right,
She's
yeah.
going to lose me again. Such a hard decision. One, it was hard. Two, I did it from very far away. I At one point I had to get away from the situation and I ran to Israel. I was in
Okay.
Israel for almost a year and I did it from there, which means it put so much distance between the two of us that
Oh,
might have made it easier. It didn't make it easy. It was still hell, but it probably made it easier because there was so much distance between us. But yeah,
mhm.
I can't say there was ever guilt free ever, but I made peace
No.
with it. It's easier for me to live this way and have less of a connection. I have more of my life. I am less triggered. My emotions are, more stable.
Mhm.
It's difficult when it comes to the point where you have to cut off ties with your family. Whether
Mhm.
it's me making that decision or I have siblings who just don't want to talk to me. What I'm trying to say, it sucks when it is family that is causing so much pain in your
Mhm.
life. It really does. It sucks.
Yeah, I mean, 'cause obviously you have that history with them, and 'cause, again, I think especially things like siblings, right? Like, when you're a kid, you're like, "Oh, this is somebody, like, I'd play with," or, I mean, I sort of looked up to one of my siblings, but now I'm like, "Oh, they weren't a great person to look up to." Yeah. But even, like, what you said about, like, having that physical distance, because I think, again, it was like, when I'd got to where my partner lives, like, being 3 hours away from anybody I knew, just noticing how much calmer I was. And even just because the 2 friends I've got now, and obviously, like, my partner and his family, like, weirdly, like, noticing things they don't do that people of my past did made me recognize that people of the past were toxic. They will be accommodating if I'm like, "Oh, it's too loud in here," or "I'm getting really anxious, I need to go," or, "Is it okay to sit in the corner?" They're like, "Yeah, absolutely, sure."
Of course.
Other people be like, "Oh, no, I don't really like sitting over there. Oh, no, that's a bit much. Oh, you just put up with it. Oh, it'll be fine." Or, like, again, like, they'd kind of offer something and then be like, "Oh, Brian's scrounging off me." And having genuine people that genuinely want to be around, I had my partner, his basically his entire family, and my best friend help me move. People of the past, like, they wouldn't walk 5 minutes, like, up the road to come see me if I wasn't doing great. And when I had my massive breakdown in 2020, I noticed this weird, it's a weird dynamic, but initially people would like rush to my rescue to make sure I'm okay, just for the drama and be like, oh, like I'm here. Then as soon as, kind of mental health services take over, I don't hear anything from them. But, I had friends not even offer to come and see me while I was in hospital. Like the one friend that came to see me was a work friend. I didn't have other friends come and see me at all, or even message. And I think just that breakdown in general just opened up my eyes to a lot of stuff. But it was just bad timing because I had the breakdown in like February 2020, came out of hospital, and then COVID happened and like lockdown
Oh,
and stuff.
wow.
But I think that is what kind of really jump started me being like, I need to move out. I need to change everything around me just because I can't cope anymore. Because I think the months prior to that, like I had a friend and they were quite supportive, but it was a thing where we'd always planned to meet up. Then they'd cancel on me last minute to go and see another friend, and then be like, "Oh well, I couldn't exactly say no. It was a bit rude." I was like, "But you're constantly."
You could say no to me, but not to them, huh?
Yeah, yeah. Or like they'd constantly be bitching about this person, and then they're friends 5 minutes later, and I was just like, you know what, I can't be asked with this. And I think having that distance as well, like just helping you recognize those patterns, and you're like, that was not great. Yeah, obviously, I'm not great 100% either, but it's the fact that they were happy to constantly put me down. I had two friends that were like door-to-door carers. I did a video about it the other day, but yeah, like they'd expect me to stand in the pouring rain waiting for them while they're working, or I'd be locked in their car for an hour while they're working so we can go out to drink afterwards, but they'd ignore me the whole night as soon as other people turn up. So then I'd be like, oh, well, I'm going home. But then they'd be like, oh, but you can't because I'm staying at yours. I'm like, okay, so you're literally treating me like a lapdog, making me walk around with you, wait in the pouring rain, being locked in a car. You don't talk to me all evening and you still expect to stay at my house. It's a thing, I think, just because I'm remembering more of that now. It's like, what was their thought process? What is it, oh, well, Bryan won't say no. Like, I know he'll do anything. And I think because I would at that point, I was so kind of down the dumps and lonely. Like, I would kind of cling to anyone or kind of accept any behavior, going back to that loneliness. If I'm not alone, that's better, even if the people around me aren't exactly nice. But it's interesting because I think, with BPD, like, because I did a video the other day about people will be like, oh, don't use mental health as an excuse. But then they'll blame your mental illness anytime you hold them accountable. And I had partners before, they wouldn't even want to understand about BPD or anything. They did not want to know. They're like, that's your thing. But then they also wouldn't want to understand why I'm acting a certain way. And it's like, well, what are you kind of expecting?
It's important. And I'm assuming your partner now is informed, knows all about BPD or knows like your triggers.
Yeah, I mean, like I've had conversations with him about it before, and I think for him it's more getting to know me as an individual, because like he did get like books about BPD and stuff, but obviously it's so broad. He's like, well, I don't think that applies. Oh, what if he does that? Like, I don't see that in him. So like, I think he kind of used it as a bit of a guideline, but being like, okay, well, what are your triggers?
Right.
We are on a bit of a break at the moment. Like, just I think the move kind of and other stuff that's happened, like, just kind of got to me a bit. So just kind of need a bit of a break. Like, because obviously, like, arguments are still really hard. To be honest, we've both got really high defenses. I think, me coming from my background, like, and having worked on myself, I'm like, I'm not tolerating anything anymore, like anything. So it kind of leaves no room to kind
Yeah.
of meet in the middle. But I think with him, like, he hasn't had those experiences. So he's like, well, I don't see what the big deal is, or I don't quite understand. And so then it's quite hard to kind of meet in the middle sometimes.
Yeah, I that's what I've realized, that people who don't it's difficult for those that don't have the experience of BPD to
Mm,
understand what we're going through, or how deeply we feel things, or how they try to understand. Some, like, I have some
mm,
friends who try to understand, some don't even do that, but some actually they try, but they'll
mm.
always get it wrong.
Well,
I mean, not in a bad way. It's
yeah,
like
yeah,
they just don't get it. No, but like, how could they, if our emotions are more heightened, if we're more
yeah,
sensitive, how is it even possible?
yeah. I think that's what, like, because even my partner would say it. Like, he'll be like, "Oh, like, well, sometimes I have this, but I imagine it's not as intense as when you experience it, because you could explain the fear of abandonment, and they'll be like, oh yeah, well, I'm worried that my partner's going to leave me.' And I'm like, not probably not to the point where you can't function. You're constantly questioning it. You think, oh, because they put one less kiss, they're going to leave you, like, and it's constantly on a loop. Like, you're probably just like, oh, I don't want to lose them.
Yeah, I
Um,
had that with in college. So for the last semester, I majored in biology, and we had to do a whole a thesis. Like, we had to do research on a certain topic, and I'm really lucky that my professor decided that I could go down the BPD route. And I was giving my lecture to the class. It was such a flop. This girl raised her hand there. She's like, "But doesn't everyone feel that way?" And I did not have a good answer to does everyone, because yes, everyone can feel a little bit of it at some point in their life,
mhm.
but not to the extreme, and not like every day, and it doesn't destroy their life. It doesn't make
Yeah,
them, to
yeah.
me, like suicidal, or I struggle a lot with suicidal ideations and thoughts. And so, yeah, maybe everyone can have those thoughts of their partner is going to abandon them, but not as strong, not as quickly, not as frequently, and it
Yeah,
doesn't destroy them.
yeah, and like, because I think that's the hard thing. They get with like social media, and I think it's ironically, I think especially like apps like TikTok. I think just because of how it works, though, the algorithms and stuff, though, like, you could talk about BPD, but you could talk about like one aspect for like 60 seconds, and then people will be like, oh, well, I've got that then. And, but I also, because I think one thing I hate about social media is like, if you don't explain every minute detail, they're like, oh, well, that doesn't make sense. Or like, well, you could have put that in. I'm like, I don't have enough time, or I don't. I think, especially living with the disorder, I'm like, I'm not an expert in BPD itself. I just talk about my experiences. Like,
Exactly.
I don't know everything about the disorder. So, or even like stuff that, because it's, a self journey, like, you might think like, oh, this is a BPD thing, when actually it could be like a CPTSD thing, or an ADHD thing, or with overlaps. Like,
For sure.
it's a learning thing, and I think it's not any less true at that point where you thought, oh, I think this is a result of this. I think this is where this comes from, because again, if you're in therapy, you kind of dig deeper. You're like, oh, actually, no, that's where that comes from. But yeah, I think it's always like, yeah, people will always just be like, "Oh yeah, well I have that," like, or like everybody goes through that, and it's almost like, what will it take for it to kind of hit home, I think. And because I think of like Demi Lovato's song "Skyscraper," where she's like, "Would it make you feel better to watch me while I bleed?" And like, I kind of feel like, is that what you want to see for it to kind of be valid enough? I don't know. I think just it's a very complicated minefield, and
It is. I remember after one of my breakups, I was heartbroken, and I
mm,
spoke to a friend, and I was telling him how painful it is. It's like literally destroying my life. I can't. I am having horrible thoughts, and his response was, everyone thinks that way. Everyone thinks that their breakup is more painful than everyone else's. Yeah, but why did I end up in the psych ward? Because I tried to kill myself because of this.
yeah, or like, even it's like, again, like that fear of abandonment. Like, I've done it before, where I have got blind drunk and I've like attempted something because they haven't messaged me in like 6 hours, or again, like they've seemed a bit off. I'm like, oh god, they hate me. Like, I'm a terrible person. I'm gonna do this. I don't think everybody does that. Like,
No,
I,
I don't think so.
yeah, I think like because with breakups again, like I used to very much be that person where it's like I think my last breakup was pretty much like I think it was like months before my breakdown, and like that was like the worst breakup I ever had. Like I was a walking zombie. I was crying all the time. I remember I was like crying in the middle of a cafe, but like so then the person was like, "Oh, have a free cup of tea." I'm like, "Thank you." Great, awesome. But like I was literally a shell of myself. Like I think there's photos of me from around that time, and I just look so defeated. And despite again, kind of me and my partner having conversations recently, like I said to him, like I feel bad that I'm actually doing okay about kind of having a bit of a break, but I think it's just because I think that's what I needed at that point. But I think looking back at some relationships, like when they have actually ended, if it's been amicable, it's not as bad for me. But if it's that kind of, rug pulled from under my feet and this intense kind of thing, like that's where I'm completely broken.
Yeah.
Because, it's that kind of they'll just block you and ghost you and not have a chance to talk. I think that was the most triggering for me. Because I was just like, well, you're not even giving a chance to talk about what's going on. Because the day before my ex broke up with me, he literally said to me, he was like, well, I know you're not going anywhere. And then he broke up with me. So I was like, oh, okay.
I don't know. Relationships are a big one for me. Relationships with BPD is just something I struggle with a lot.
Like, I think like with BPD, I feel like it's relationships that we want the most. And I think that's why fuck them up the most. Like, I think, like, personally for me, like, friendships aren't as bad, but definitely romantic relationships, like car crashes. And, there's that kind of typical kind of like a borderline does usually tend to attract like quite a narcissistic person, just kind of just how they both, and
Oh gosh.
just
Yeah.
with like, kind of like the love bombing. And I'm like, yeah, I'll put you up on a pedestal and you're going to love that. And then they're like, I've had enough of you. Oh, or like the typical where they're like, oh, I don't mind clingy. I love talking to you, blah, blah. And then after they've got you, or after like 2-3 weeks, you go away.
It's crazy. It's crazy. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much for joining us on today's BPD Bravery Show. If you've enjoyed it, then like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure to tune into our show every Monday and Friday. And remember, you are so much more than your BPD.